Okay, welcome everybody to the July Children and Young People Scrutiny Commission. Now, briefly for some housekeeping, although this is a virtual meeting, it is still a formal meeting of Hackney Council, and all the usual constitutional requirements of council meetings still apply, and all contributions are made with the consent of the chair. I would like to remind members that this meeting is being held in public and is being broadcast live via the internet. The rights of the press and public to record and film the meeting will continue to apply, and representatives may be in attendance or viewing the live stream. Just a few points to remember in terms of operability. Please turn your mics on mute unless you are speaking. Please keep your cameras on, because as chair and also the vice chair and the scrutiny officer will be viewing everybody in grid view and would like to be able to identify those of you who wish to speak. If you would like to speak, please either indicate this in the chat function or can you raise your hand in order to get my attention, and state your name and affiliation before you make a comment. Thank you for your patience. We're now going to start the meeting. So item 1 is apologies for absence. I have apologies for absence from Louisa, Joe, Councillor Etty, Councillor Joseph, who I would like to take this opportunity to congratulate on the birth of her healthy baby boy last week. Are there any other apologies for absence or lateness?
Shabnam Hassan has sent her apologies as well.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, moving on to item 2, urgent items. There are no urgent items, and the order of business is as set out in the agenda. Item 3, declarations of interest. Do members have any declarations of interest?
Chair, I'm a governor of a school, garden school in Hackney.
Thank you.
Chair, I'm a teacher and NEU member.
Thank you. Any others? No. In which case, we'll move on to item 4, the first substantive item on the agenda, school admissions update, September 2020. Can I please ask you all to turn to page 1 of the agenda pack? School admissions is a standing item which is taken annually with the Commission's work programme. The aim of this item is for the Commission to maintain oversight of school admissions processes, ensuring that there are satisfactory arrangements for those children entering primary school and secondary school in September 2020. The Commission also seeks reassurance that there is sufficient school capacity in years going forward, for which the Council has a specific duty. We have just 20 minutes for this item. Can I ask officers to highlight key information from the report, and please can you keep this brief to just 2 to 3 minutes, and then we will follow up with questions and answers. Okay, Annie, can I hand over to you, please, if you'd like to go first?
Yes, I'd like to really just pass to Marion. We'll highlight key points.
I'm unable to hear Annie. I'm not sure if that's the case for the rest of you in the meeting.
Can I hear her?
You can't hear it either. Okay, no, Annie, we're not able to hear you. You're very faint. We can hear you, but you're just very faint. Okay, she's just indicated that Marion is going to present. So can I hand over to you now, Marion?
Okay, good evening, everybody. My name's Marion Lavelle. I'm Head of Admissions and School Place Planning. It's an annual report, and I'm going to go through it quickly as I have 3 minutes. It's just to say, for reception and secondary transfer, virtually all parents now apply online. For reception this year, we had 50 more applicants than the previous year, which is a good sign because roles have been falling. We have high numbers of parents that express a first preference for a Hackney school. It's higher for reception because parents generally like a very local school, and that's at 93.6%, but it's at 87% for secondary transfer, which is 1 percentage up on the previous year. As far as meeting parental preference, for the top 3 preferences, we are on par with the London average. There is a lot of some cross-border movement of pupils. This year, more out-borough residents went into primary schools than went out, and that's mainly because of boroughs, schools on the borough boundary, particularly Westbourne Riverside Academy, where more than 50% of its intake is from out borough. With secondary transfer, the two schools that admit most pupils out borough are Skinner's Academy and Our Lady's Convent. For the primaries, the schools that most Hackney children go out to are Ambler and St Joan of Arc. As far as pupils with education, health and care plans are concerned, there's a separate process for these pupils, and they're set out in the report, and you'll see from that data that the majority of pupils go to mainstream schools in the borough. Regarding school place planning, since 2016, there has been a drop in reception class places, but the good news is that there's been a marginal increase in the number on roll in the current reception class compared to last year's reception class. And as stated earlier, more reception parents applied for school places this year, and our projections from the GLA are showing a steady increase. And when I say steady, it's something like 74 projected additional pupils from now to 2026, but travel is going in the right direction. As far as secondary places are concerned, we have a sufficient number of places, but moving on, we will have a surplus unless more pupils come into the borough. I think my 3 minutes is probably up, so questions, please.
Thank you very much, Marion. And now I'd like to hand over to members of the Commission for questions. Does anybody have any questions? Just having this.
Councillor Conway.
Okay, Councillor Patrick. Do you want to
start? Sorry. Yep, sorry, I wasn't sure whether you were going to come in or just noting me. Yeah, I've got some questions. One, I'd like to know about how many SEN children, both at primary level and secondary level, didn't get the choice of their parents, their first choice. What happened to, there's also a lot of SEN children that at national hadn't got a place as yet, and whether that's because there isn't a place for them or they're waiting for a specialist place. And I've got another curiosity about on table 3 about pupils not offered a preference on school National Day offer. There's the highest area is E5 of children not getting an offer. But one of the schools with a surplus, which I was about to ask about, is Mandeville School, which is in my ward, which has had its numbers reduced in the pan, as you call it. So what happens to these children that haven't got an offer? Are they waiting for a specific school? Is that why they haven't got an offer? And what's going to happen to them? And also, what are you doing, I think, to support Mandeville, which has had its numbers cut? And why aren't any of these children going to Mandeville, which seems to have vacancies, or are they?
Okay, Marion, are you okay to take a couple of questions? I know that you had there was a couple of questions from Councillor Patrick in one there, but would you be happy to take another question from Councillor Potter?
Yes.
Okay, Councillor Potter, if you'd like to ask your question, and then we'll hand over to Marion.
I'd like to ask a question about the different schools that are over subscribed, but also the under subscribed schools. What kind of strategic analysis goes on in terms of identifying any particular characteristics, and then kind of going on from that? What kind of support do you give to those schools that are struggling to attract pupils to actually improve perhaps performance or appeal to the school to actually benefit those children that actually attend the school. If I could just ask an additional question too, I'd like to understand a bit more, following on from what Councillor Patrick said, on schools that have had numbers reduced temporarily, you know, in terms of caps. What are the decision processes that you've gone through to actually determine which schools have the caps in place for this September?
Okay, I'll try and cover all of those. Annie, if I miss anything, let me know. Councillor Patrick, as far as SEND pupils are concerned and those that didn't get their first choice, I will have to come back to you on that because I don't have that data at hand. SEND admissions are managed by my colleague, but we will get back to you on that. As far as the highest number of parents that didn't get one of their preferences living in E5, it's historic. E5 is a large postcode, but it may not solely be down to that postcode. And I know that there are areas of E5, such as round immediately near Mandeville School, where the families don't always meet the oversubscription criteria for mixed non-denominational schools in the locality. So, for example, children living at Mandeville will live too far away to get into City Academy Hackney unless they have siblings. There are places at other mixed schools, but those schools are faith schools, and there are places at other mixed non-denominational schools, but much further away. But that is recognised. As far as Mandeville haven't had its numbers reduced, at the moment Mandeville has a temporary PAN, which is the published admission number of 45, but its confirmed published admission number is 60. And a temporary cap is really just a mechanism for the school and the local authority to agree a number, because you are almost certain that the number's not going to rise above 45. So it's a way for the school to plan its budget. But it's a temporary cap is a temporary cap. It doesn't mean anything in law. And if there were suddenly applicants that wanted to go to Mandeville School, the school would have to admit above 45. But those numbers have not materialised for many years, and all the temporary caps that are in place with the agreement of the schools. And mostly it's something that they requested. The other questions now. As far as looking at oversubscribed and undersubscribed schools, it is something that we look at each year. And in all the years that I've worked at Hackney Learning Trust, patterns don't really change that much from year to year. And you have certain schools that are oversubscribed, thinking particularly in secondary, and that almost perpetuates itself each year. So the most oversubscribed school, which is Mossbourne Community Academy, because parents know that it's oversubscribed and lots of parents apply for it, that just continues. Now, the good news of our secondary schools is that most of the schools are full, and parents that don't get places at the very oversubscribed schools are generally very happy with their second, third or fourth preference, or even their allocated school. Now, in the past, there's no magic solution, because the numbers are the numbers, and if some schools end up with vacancies, and I'm talking about primary more here, where there are more places than pupils that need places, you can't just magic up the numbers. So there are sort of numerous factors that you have to take into account to try and increase those numbers. And there are things like, as far as secondary transfer is concerned, when we have our annual parents meeting for Year 5 parents, we've traditionally invited the head teachers of schools, not so much to promote their schools, but to talk about transition, and it gives them an opportunity to talk about their school so that parents are much more aware of it. So if you take a school like Our Lady's Convent that has had surplus places in recent years, and when you looked at why fewer parents were applying for that school, a lot of it was to do with they still thought that you had to be a practicing Catholic to get in. And the head teacher came along to Year 5 parents' meetings and explained that they welcome all faiths, no faiths, and that school's applications has increased in recent years, although with a lot of schools it would still want to be in a much better position than it is currently in. Have I missed anything, Annie?
I'm going to see if you can hear me. Can you hear?
You're very faint, Annie. I'm wondering if it's worth you writing something in the chat function, and perhaps I can read it, or perhaps even Marion can read it if Marion, you're au fait with the chat function.
We've just recently gone on. Can you read it, Councillor? Because
okay,
it's on Microsoft Teams.
What I'm going to do is I think we have a question from Councillor Gordon. I'm going to get Councillor Gordon to ask that question, and I will see if I can read whatever it is that Annie has to add afterwards. Councillor Gordon?
Thanks very much, Chair, and thanks very much for the report and, an overall success story in terms of school admissions. My question, I think, is not strictly on admissions, but flows from it. It's in relation to transitions. I mean, obviously, we're going through an extremely challenging time, and this is going to be challenging for all of us, but it's one group of children been identified as being particularly challenging for children who are going through transitions, either starting school from nursery or going from Year 6 to secondary school. And this will have a particular impact on children with special educational needs and disabilities. Particularly, an example is children, neurodiverse children who will find it very challenging to go from one set of unpredictable routines into secondary school transition. I mean, what work is being done to support children? How much do we know about what the consistency of that work is across our family of schools? And in particular, what sort of work is being done to support children with special educational needs and disabilities in terms of transition, including work with their with the parent groups of those children who represent the parents of those children?
Shall I answer that?
Yes, please, Marion.
Yes. Transition is being managed by our school improvement team, and they're in touch with I'll just talk about secondary schools first, all of the secondary schools to coordinate what they're offering for transition, and that's combinations of virtual tours, telephone and video calls with the schools. As far as children with education, health and care plans are concerned, our SEND team will be liaising with the schools so that those children know that they're starting, and the schools will be in touch. There's also an enormous amount of data that's transferred to the secondary schools, and we feed in the catch results, and all the primary schools provide a lot of data that's coordinated by the MESA team, which is our data team, and that's all sent on to the secondary schools. Of course, it's not the same as what it was in previous years when all the families could physically tour the schools and the head of years could meet the parents, go into the primary schools, but it's still happening virtually. I don't know whether Annie wants to add more to what I've just said. Annie?
Yes, I've tried to dial in, so I'm hoping that's better.
That is much better.
Yeah. Okay, good. I'm glad about that. I'm sorry, because I was redialing and I partly missed what Marion said. I mean, it's been something that has been of great concern to all school leaders who want to make sure that the incoming children have as good an induction as possible. And clearly they would much rather see the children and their families face to face, both for the individual induction sessions, but also for the group sessions that they have. They will be, as I'm sure Marion said, replacing that with online sessions, and we will be distributing information about that for the Year 6s. But also they have been paying particular attention to the more vulnerable children who may have difficulty settling in. And I know they will make sure we've certainly given out guidance, and they have talked to us about doing more individually for children they know have special educational needs or are vulnerable in other ways.
One of Councillor Patrick's questions that I failed to answer was the support that we offered to parents that didn't get any of their preferences. Those children were all offered a place on National Offer Day. Generally, they were offered their nearest school with a vacancy, but not always. And if those parents then contacted us to say that they didn't want their nearest school, then we would discuss with them whether or not we were able to offer another school with a vacancy. And they all remained on the waiting lists of their higher preference schools. And the situation on Offer Day is always, it changes quite a lot from Offer Day to 6 months down the road, the 1st of September. So sometimes when they feel a little upset because you haven't got any of your preference schools and you've been allocated a school, you may go to that school and be perfectly happy with it. And when the place comes up at one of your preference schools, you turn it down. But quite often places do come up at higher preference schools from the 1st of March to the start of September. But they are all allocated a place on Offer Day.
Thank you very much, Marion. So I have a follow-up question from Councillor Gordon. I also have a question from Councillor Peters. Can I ask everybody to be very brief with your questions and answers, please? Councillor Gordon.
Yeah, I mean, thanks very much, Marion and Danny, for that explanation. I mean, I think I had asked as well what's been done to sort of work with parent groups. And obviously this is a very challenging position for the Learning Trust. I understand that the whole thing is. But I mean, I think it is very worrying about the position of those children going from, a disrupted education that is difficult for them to navigate. It's not only children with EHCPs, it's children. I really hope I really hope as much as possible is being done for this cohort of children.
Well, I can only reiterate what Annie said. An enormous amount of work is going into coordinating transition so that the children are as prepared as they can be for either entering reception or transferring from primary to secondary school, with an emphasis on the children that are most vulnerable.
Thank you very much, Marion. Councillor Peters.
Hi, yeah, so it just relates to Table 2 that Councillor Patrick was speaking, Table 3 rather, Table 3 that Councillor Patrick was speaking about earlier. I was wondering whether you could just talk us through how this banding is done. What those bands mean, whether those bands are equal in size, the number of pupils in each band, and what seems to happen there is that there are very few pupils in band A who don't get a preference, very few in band E, and then there's a grouping towards sort of C and D, whether you have an explanation for that.
Well, I'll try. Banding's quite complicated, but basically banding exists to ensure that if a school is oversubscribed, and that's the key word there because it really only operates if a school is oversubscribed, the children that they admit rather represent the proportions in each band of ability. Now, some schools have 4 bands, some schools have 5 bands. some schools place pupils in the band based on the number of applicants that apply to that school. Other schools use the national ability range so that they have cut-off points for each band, depending on the numbers that apply. But at the end of the day, if a school uses 4 bands, whether it's national ability range or the ability range of the applicants that apply to the school, the cut-off points aren't that much different. This table is perfect because it looks at first preferences. So if, for example, somebody made a first preference for, we'll just say, Latimer School in Enfield, and a second preference for Stoke Newington, they would appear in the unbanded section. You can only look at first preference. But it's a guide, and it does show that those children that will most likely not to get a place at one of their preference schools are generally in the lower bands than the higher bands. It's also true that some schools, when they apply their oversubscription criteria, and if you look at the appendices, that will demonstrate that they exhaust their Band A waiting list before they exhaust their Band C and D waiting list. So it's really the reality of, I suppose, the Band A's maybe, or the parents of the Band A children may make more applications outside the borough. There will be various factors. But you will see that some schools exhaust their Band A waiting list before they exhaust their C and D waiting lists. And these smaller because not all schools have 5 bands of ability.
Does that answer your question, Councillor Peters?
So I think it explains for band E is very low because Band E might not exist for not a lot of schools. Band A is very low because there's a tendency for schools to prefer Band A pupils. Do we have any idea? Sorry, do we have any idea as to how many pupils are in each band?
It's not that the schools prefer the band. It's not that the schools select, or select is the wrong word, but it's not that more Band A children initially get allocated to the school than other bands. It's just that they may end up going to the independent sector, for example. So the reality is, if you take a school like, I don't know, I won't name a school, just any school. If you generally look at the last child to be offered a place under the distance priority, the Band A child will quite often live further away than the Band C and D children. But when a school looks at the applicants that apply, it will be, as far as possible, the same proportion in each band when they apply the oversubscription criteria. And then if they apply their oversubscription criteria, well, just a school that's got a PAN of 100, they operate 4 bands of ability, and when they apply their oversubscription criteria, they'll have 4 Band A, B, C and Ds. But they have to have a sufficient number of Band A applicants that apply in the first place in order for that waiting list not to be exhausted.
I think we have. I'm sorry.
I just want to add that we were conscious of the issues, particularly for boys in E5 and E8. So Marion's team have done particular work with the primary schools there about making sure parents know about filling up all their preferences and making choices of mixed or boys' schools where they are likely to get a place. Clearly, we've got Clapton Girls there. City Academy has a really tight catchment area, and Mossbourne is close but has a more complex arrangement for admissions. So Marion's team have done quite a lot of work with the primary schools there to make sure the end of year 5, beginning of year 6, boys particularly get good advice.
Yes, and we'll be holding the meetings for the Year 5 parents now. There'll be virtual webinars that parents have to sign up to, but then there'll be a video online and that will be sent to the primary schools. What we've also put a lot of effort into is to asking parents, because some parents automatically, I'm not applying to a faith school, my child isn't a member of, and it's saying to them, go along to the open day and evening. Those schools, if you talk to the staff, you'll probably find that the majority of pupils are either members of another faith or no faith. And you need to go and see what it's like, because they have, you know, their perception of a faith school is very different to their perception of a community school. So a lot of work has gone into persuading parents to go and see those schools, and you know, our faith schools serve the whole local community very well.
Thank you very much, Marion. I just have a very brief question to ask about COVID and whether that is likely to have an impact on place planning for September 2020. And sorry, can I also ask, what is the impact of reducing admissions to the schools that are having the temporary and the permanent caps? What's the financial implications for these schools?
Shall I answer that, Marion?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So the plan is, so schools are funded per pupil. What they find difficult to budget for is if, say, they're trying to run 2 classes in reception, but they only fill 1 1/3. Say it's better for them to know they've got 1 full class of 30, the finances all make sense. Whereas if you have classes averaging size 20, which would happen if you have 40 children split between 2 classes, it's really difficult to manage financially. So as Marion said, those arrangements are done in consultation with the school, often at the request of the school, so that they can manage their budget and plan their staffing around a particular number of classes. I think the impact of COVID is difficult to say. I think, and certainly we're seeing, and we'll come on to this, lower numbers coming into school this term. We hope that both the health situation will improve and confidence will grow, so that as soon as schools are able to open to all children will return. However, I suspect there will be some families who don't feel confident, some for very good medical reasons that Amy might want to talk about, will have you know, children being shielded. But I think so. But I think what we will be looking at is schools making provision for that, for those children learning at home until they're ready to come back into school.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, if you can be very brief, Michael.
I'll be very brief. Can we assume that every child in Hackney has been given a place for the new school year, whether it's in nursery, whether it's in primary school, or whether it's in secondary school? If not, how many children are we talking about? And if there are children who haven't been accepted, can we assume that by the beginning of the new school year, they will all have been accepted?
Yes, every child has been offered a school place that applied on time, and also those that applied late. I mean, obviously an application may have came in yesterday that we haven't been able to allocate a place to, but if that was the case, they'll be allocated a place next week. There are sufficient places for everybody, and everybody that's applied within the last week or so has been allocated either a reception place or a secondary transfer place for September.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Michael, and thank you, Marion and Annie, for your report and for answering the questions. And it's pleasing to see that for once, actually, the trend in terms of reception school numbers, place numbers are going up, and I hope that they continue to, and that our schools don't continue to have issues that they've had in previous years with planning, because I know that's been quite problematic for them. Okay, so I think we're going to move on now to the next item of the agenda, item 5, and this is the COVID-19 response and recovery plan. Can I please ask people to turn to pages 21 of the agenda pack? The Commission is continuing to monitor the impact of COVID-19 upon children and young people and the subsequent response of the Council and its partners. This part of the meeting is split into 3 parts. The main focus will be on how COVID-19 has impacted on children and young people's mental health and emotional well-being. But to begin with, we are giving our Hackney Youth Parliament representatives a platform to describe some of the ways that COVID-19 has impacted on children and young people, particularly in relation to education. Okay, so I'm going to hand over now to our Hackney Youth Parliament representatives. Can I just say that we've got 20 minutes for this part of the item, so I'd be grateful if you could keep your presentation to 10 minutes, and then we can have another 10 minutes for questions and answers. So handing over now to Hackney Youth Parliament.
Hello.
Hi.
Can you guys hear us? Yeah.
I can. Yeah.
Hello. Hello. My name is Marwa, and I'm a member of Hackney Youth Parliament. And thank you for having us and giving us the opportunity to share our experience with you. Firstly, I would like to make a statement about our experience. So we are quite disappointed by the lack of communication and information that is shared with the borough, especially to young people. It is a very concerning time for us, especially young people, and we need a clarification. People who are supposed to check on young people are not getting back to us. We haven't received any updates, and also people in power are not really sure about how to answer our questions. There's another thing that the Hackney Youth Parliament, are close to the governors than any other young people, but still it's quite difficult to even receive any information from them to update us, and then from us we can update other young people. There are, like, for example, there are some of my friends who are unsure about what's going on around them. That is because people like, as in teachers at school and other people, are having conversations with their parents and not directly to the children, and I think that is not right, because some parents are not even aware of the education system in here, especially parents who are new to this country, and parents are just like, you have to study and get a good grade, but they're not really sure about how the system works and the process of getting a grade. And also I think it is important to have a conversation with the young person themselves in order to allow them to know about the decision that is made for them, and to allow them to make decision about their future, because it will affect their future. And finally, I think we need more actions than just words. And I will hand over to my other colleagues of Hackney Youth Parliament. Thank you.
Very much. Thank you for that.
Hi, I'm Tapiwa. I'm 16 years old. I'm a member of Hackney Youth Parliament, and I am in Year 12 currently. And I'd just like to speak on one of the following topics which are impacting young people, and that is the engagement with education. Of course, when we heard about lockdown measures being put in place and school being suspended, schools took a variety of different approaches. And with that came a lot of problems with access and engagement, of course. Like, speaking from my own personal experience, I wasn't allowed to email any teachers because it went against like my school's safeguarding policy, whilst other people who I know were able to do so. And of course, this impacted how I received my education, but it also meant that there wasn't any clear communication in regards to what was important, what was of high priority, and how the course of this year was ultimately going to change because of this coronavirus. And what that did is it added to a lot of academic anxiety, which I saw with my peers, who some refused, in fact, to engage in work which was at the time not even applicable to the course of study. And I understand that this was ultimately dependent on the fact that we didn't know how long lockdown was going to last. But a lot of young people felt disorientated and disengaged because, at least at my school, because the work they were being set was not compatible with the course of study. And they weren't tasks which were of high priority or were going to get us the esteemed A stars or A's. And this disruption to learning is particularly problematic because we saw figures as low as 10%. And I said this at a meeting with the roundtable with Councillor Bramble and the woman from the Learning Trust, sorry. But it's really problematic because we are now expected to return to education. And what isn't being addressed is the lack of engagement and how young people have and have not received the education which was delivered online. And ultimately, how schools are supposed to protect young people's mental health and their academic future as we transition back into normality, as they call it. So one thing I'd like to raise is, how are schools going to support children who are behind on education? Is it going to be a case of you haven't done the work during quarantine, so we can no longer support you and we can't have you in our class anymore? Or are there going to be other measures to put in place to protect what seems to be an abundance of young people who are experiencing this issue of backlog and disengagement? So that's my main question, and that is, I think, should be a main priority, is protecting young people's academic future and their mental health going forward.
Thank you very much for this. Do we have any other contributors before I open up to questions?
Yeah,
we do? Great.
Hi, I'm Raven. I wanted to touch on the school's lack of communication with their students. For example, some schools maybe only call a student once or twice a week. Schools should have been contacting the students weekly to see how they are for their well-being, seeing if they're doing their work, and if not, then how they can help with these actions. This will move on to my next point about how schools expected children to complete the work at home on Google Docs or online, but some students don't have access to laptops or a computer. And some young people might be too embarrassed to actually speak up about that and say that they don't have those resources. Some children might be like a young carer as well, or they might have to go to the shop for their mum and do some shopping to help their parents out. Or also this could might be because of lack of space and they might not be able to have a room to themselves to do their work. And we also wanted to touch on free school meal students. What support are they getting? Are they getting those meals? We also wanted to talk about how they're receiving their vouchers, and also the students that are back at school, because some preschool meal students aren't back at school. Are they still getting the meals? Are they still getting the vouchers? And yeah, someone else is going to talk now.
Thank you, Ravian. Hi.
Hi, so my name is Abdullahi, and I'm also a member of Hackney Youth Parliament and also Young Speaker of Hackney. So today I wanted to point out my concerns on GCSE results. So as we know that systematic racism is something that happens daily, this makes me worried about the GCSE results that young people are going to be getting in August. As students of color, like my brother, are going to be negatively impacted by this, as they're not going to be getting the grades they're more than capable of getting. And also, my worries are not only filled with the current Black Lives Matter movement and my own education experience, but it's also filled with through my conversations with senior members of the council who have asked me, what do my friends on the street think, as well as referring to bias as subjectivity. So how are we going to change this when people in these positions refuse to acknowledge this issue? Thank you.
Sorry, Abdullahi, your last point, I didn't hear very well.
Yeah.
Could you just make that point again? Sorry.
Yeah, so my last point was also through my conversations with senior members of the council who have asked me what do my friends on the street think about this issue currently going on, as well as referring to bias as subjectivity. How are we going to change this when people in these positions refuse to acknowledge this issue?
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So is that the end of the contributions from Hackney Youth Parliament?
No, sorry, I'm just going to finish off.
Sure, thanks.
Hi, my name's Aliyah. I'm also a member of Hackney Youth Parliament. So I'd just like to start by saying that we'd like to note that although the statements are coming from us, they are reflective of the views of many young people in Hackney. And we are all concerned about our progression to the next academic year or the next stages of our lives. And I think, like, touching on to Piwa's point about the lack of engagement and accessibility to the provision of online learning, it has like left us young people like alone with our thoughts, because some of us might not be involved in lessons and stuff. And I think with this and the lack of checkups from teachers and other youth provisions, we sort of just feel like a bit stranded. And I think as a result of this, a lot of us has turned to social media as a form, like as an outlet, just to share our views and our opinions. And I'm sure everyone is aware of what's been going on with the recent murder of George Floyd and just the rise in the presence of the Black Lives Matter movement. And I think a lot of young people are at the forefront of this sort of fight for the acknowledgement and accountability for the disregard of Black lives, and it can become frustrating and overwhelming. And I think I'm going to talk from personal experience here. I don't want to take up too much time, but recently I was sent a quite distressing and racist message from my teacher, and I feel like me and my peers, we wasn't sure who to really reach out to, so we sort of chose to take action ourselves. Now, I am aware that Hackney have, you know, supported the young people who are going on the protest, and they have set out a sort of hotline for young people to call and talk to. But I'm just a bit concerned about how this is run and how many young people are aware of it. And I know me personally, I was able to go to Curtis and Nana, who run Hackney Youth Parliament, and they were able to support me. But I'm just aware that there's a lot of young people who won't have this sort of access to these types of people. And what would they do if they experience like the same thing that I have? And just to sort of wrap it up, I feel like Hackney Youth Parliament, like we just feel as if we've been told like countless times from the council that we're valued and we want to be heard and all this stuff, but we feel like we've just been underused, especially during this time when we have so many concerns and we are young Hackney. You know, without us and without our voices, there is no young Hackney. So I hope from this today and from what we've all said to you, that the Commission can look into these issues that we have raised to help, you know, formulate the next steps about children and young people and just how we will move forward during this pandemic and just move forward in the future. And I just want to say thank you guys for giving us this time to be heard. And that's it from me.
Thank you very much, Aliyah, and to all the other contributors. I don't think you could have summed up more eloquently how you have been thinking and feeling during these past few weeks, and I think that it was pretty hard-hitting and impactful for many of us listening to you. And I can assure you that we have we agree that we, even as a commission, have not utilised, you know, your voices to, you know, best effect, and that there's definitely more work that we need to do to ensure that we're able to collaborate more on the work that we're both doing, to ensure that you know, the work that you're doing, that we get to hear about it, and that the recommendations that we make as a commission are informed by the work that you've done and the contributions that you make to our meeting. So I'm hoping to meet with you in due course to think about to discuss how we might be able to work better together to ensure that we have more sessions like this, because, you know, I don't know about the others on the call, but I imagine that, you know, your contributions have been invaluable, particularly because we're now going to hear from Hackney Learning Trust and Children and Family Services, and you've given us, you know, you've helped us to be able to direct our questions more effectively to the officers who are here today. So thank you very much. I can't state how helpful and useful it's been having you. So I'm wondering now, are you happy to have some questions, or would you prefer if I hand over potentially to some of the officers that we have here today to see whether they are able to answer any of the questions that you have? Annie, I'm not sure, for example, if you would be happy to answer some of the questions. Is Annie still here?
Yeah, I'm here.
There were just a few questions that I feel, I don't know if you would like me to summarise, but in particular, I think there was a question about the continuity between the different schools, the contacts that schools are having, in terms of the contact that schools are having with students and the support that they're offering, the standard of education that different children are receiving at different pupils are receiving at different schools. And yes, in terms of unconscious bias and systemic racism in relation to predicted grades being used as final grades for pupils. Are you able to come in on that?
Yeah, I'll try and answer a number of questions. And so I want to say thank you to all the young people who've spoken. It's very powerful, and you've been very honest about your experiences. I also want to say I think it's been particularly challenging for year 11 and year 13, challenging for everybody, but for those students who were expecting to do exams, who expected to have, you know, a full route through to those May-June exams, and that all stopped in March, although they did have to do some work for some weeks. But I think more than other year groups, they've had a significant stop to what they've been doing, and I understand how difficult that must be, although I also know that institutions have been working hard to make sure that they have options for next year, whether they're in year 11 or year 13. The advice we have given, the guidance we've given out to schools about contact with young people, is that they must contact every young person once a week and more vulnerable young people more often. And that's separate from the learning materials being given out. And those resources have been given out in a range of ways, whether they've been live online lessons or recorded online lessons or online materials that are text-based. So there's been a range of things there. Our feedback has been that year 12 students have been able to access a reasonable amount, but I'm conscious that that is what the schools are giving out and not necessarily what is experienced by every single student. I think that I'm not able to comment very much about them not being able to email teachers, because I know that different schools have different guidance about that, but there should always have been a number or a contact that you would have been able to call, and I hope that you haven't felt there's been nobody there who you could call. We are really conscious of some of the families who haven't been able to access materials because they don't have a laptop or a device through which to access online materials. And I know that schools have given out paper copies where they know that's the case. And I know that schools have also made local arrangements to give out laptops where possible, and for instance have loaned school laptops out. That has not covered everybody. There is a government scheme to give out laptops to children who have a social worker for communications and to year 10 students entitled to free school meals. Those laptops have not yet arrived. The ones for the children who have a social worker should arrive in the next 2 weeks. The year 10 ones we don't have a definite date, but it was predicted to be by the end of term. And we talked to Councillor Bramble about this. We are very keen that we supplement this further by having a local scheme too, because while we aren't sure what will happen in September, we might have many more children, all children back in school, we might not. We suspect that there will continue to be more dependence on online learning, on distance learning for a period. I think the other thing I wanted to talk about was free school meals. So every child entitled to free school meals should still be getting vouchers unless they've gone back to school and are getting a meal at school. So that should definitely be the case. And I know schools put a lot of effort into that in the period in the run-up to the Easter holidays and the week or so afterwards. And we haven't had queries about that beyond that time when the system was being set up. Abdullahi asked about the predictive grades. We were conscious very early on of the research that shows that there can be bias when predicting, when using teacher assessments. So we've sent out information to schools, and we have had feedback that they have used that in making sure that there isn't bias as much as possible in using those teacher assessments. And I know the guidance, I think we talked about this at the Youth Parliament session, from government was quite strict about not being able to take in work beyond a certain point, that the teachers had to base their predictions for GCSEs and A-levels on the work that had been completed by a certain point. And I think that's been a challenge across the country. So we will have to wait for August 13th for the A-level results, August 20th for the GCSE results. There is an opportunity for students, the government has said, to take exams if they want to in the autumn term, but we don't have further information about that yet. I'm also conscious there was a point about us not having used Hackney Youth Parliament as much as we should have. I think that's a well-made point, and I would want to address that as we move forward. I'm happy to answer more questions if there are any.
Well, thank you very much, Annie. I think the best use of our time actually is probably going to be if we can maybe write up the questions that the young people have put to HLT in this meeting, and if we can maybe get some formal responses to them, because I think we've also put you on the spot, which it's probably not great for you. And I think it might be useful for us to now make use of having the young people here while we still do, and to ask if the Commission have any questions for the Youth Parliament representatives. So does anybody have any questions that they would like to put to the Youth Parliament representatives? I can't see anybody indicating on the chat function. I have a question in the meantime, and then we'll have a question from Councillor Gordon. I wanted to ask, so I think the first contributor, I'm very sorry, I've forgotten your name, I'm absolutely useless with names, mentioned that she felt that there wasn't any information coming from the council. And well, I don't think you specified the council, and I just wondered who you wanted to be having more information from, and what that information would look like to you.
So basically, we had a few round tables, table meetings where we asked questions, but we didn't really got clear answers. And we thought that they would get back to us and make and give us a more clear explanation to what has been going on, and to also about the grading system we were really unsure about, because we thought that we will be going back to school, or as if my siblings will be going back to school and things. But there were just like the lack of delay, that they were just not responding to us, or even not responding to Curtis or Nana. To even they can update us, not directly like just email us and then say that this is what has happened. I mean, we do see ourselves as a voice, as a voice for other young people, but it just seems like a way of us. I mean, they do listen to us, but they don't take actions, and that is kind of disappointing. I think we need more. When we ask for something, I think there is a reason that we ask for it. If we ask a question, or if we are concerned about something, there's always something that other young people are concerned about it as well. And not only am I speaking on behalf of other young people as well, my siblings, my friends, like as I said before, they are unsure about when they will be going to school, because it's all about the people and parents, or adults are not getting involved, the young people. I think there's a really important point to make about involving young people more about what's happening around them, and what will be happening in the future as well. So, for example, like my brother is year 9, and he doesn't even know how to email a teacher, but the teachers were like, you should email us, this is my email, whenever you need me, contact me and things. But my brother is not that confident to just suddenly email a teacher and say, oh, my teacher, I need help or something. So then when I try to help, I can't understand his work, because it's different to mine. And the fact that the teachers are not even like calling him or checking up on him. So there's always like my head of sixth form is asking my sister, how is your sister? How is your brother? But then I'm like, okay, if I say that, no, okay, what would you do? You will refer to another teacher who is the head of year 9 or year 11. So then why are they not contacting my siblings or other young people to know how they're doing, and if they have any concern, or even to know about their well-being? I mean, it is a concerning time, and we are really, I mean, young people all affected by this crisis really badly. Like, we don't have anything to do. There's not much opportunities for us to do. And yeah, that's all.
And sorry, it's very, very useful. Thank you very much, Marwa. And we are going to write up, obviously this meeting has been recorded, so we're going to write up the questions that you have put, and I can say that we will ensure that you get answers to the questions that you've asked, and we can try and think about a better way of ensuring that your voices are heard, and that we can work together to ensure that you know, we're listening, and that we're getting answers to your questions, and that actually these answers are, where possible, resulting in action and change within the council. Okay, so
Councillor Conway, sorry, Councillor Conway, it's probably also worth saying we don't have any school representatives here to give their perspective, given it is a recorded meeting, so we've not been able to have a response from schools here.
Okay.
But obviously we can try and get some of that in a written response. But
that would be very useful. It would be. Thank you, Annie. So handing over to Councillor Gordon, who has a question.
Yes, thanks very, very much for your extremely powerful presentation, which I think has been, you know, incredibly helpful for us as the Commission in trying to start to understand the impact of this crisis and other issues on young people. Some of you have touched on various different issues in terms of some of your peers becoming disengaged and demoralised, also the sort of impact of social media, and, you know, the impact of the very sort of powerful and complex events going on in the world at the moment, you know, the grief and distress following the death of George Floyd, and also the movement following from that. I know it's maybe a difficult thing to talk about, but have any of you been trying to sort of access mental health or other support services? And I don't know what your experiences of that have been, either through schools or through social services, whether you've got anything that you know from people that try to access those sort of services and what their experiences have been. And also, I know some of this is going to touch on what Councillor Patrick wants to ask. I mean, I've experience schools from a different perspective as a parent of similarly aged children, and I'm afraid I would say that their experiences and those of their peers have been patchy in terms of engagement. And I really would like to know what we, as the Learning Trust and local authority, really know about how we've mapped what sort of experience of education children have had over this period, and what's going to be done to help them catch up and support them in the transition.
Thank you, Councillor Gordon. Do any of the Youth Parliament representatives want to come in?
Hello.
Hi.
So in regards to mental health, I think one of my friends was trying to access some of the mental health services. I think she was doing the First Steps program because she had recently visited her GP. And what happened was those services, of course, moved online, and she cancelled the referral to that program from her GP, and she said that she didn't need those services anymore, despite the fact that I think she still needed them. And I think a lot of young people, I don't think that's atypical. I think a lot of young people have experienced that as the mode of those services change, of course, the reaction to them and the engagement with them changes also. And from what I've seen in my peer group, and even just of her friends, even who are in similar situations, it's that they don't really engage with the services as much anymore.
That's very insightful. Thank you very much, particularly because we're going to be hearing from people who work for CAMHS later on in this meeting, and it will be really useful to be able to put into context what they tell us about the services that they've been offering and how these have been compromised by COVID, in particular, as you mentioned, in terms of the engagement that they're able to have, or referrals that they're receiving from young people and people working with young people. Councillor Patrick, did you want to ask your question?
Yes, please. Councillor Gordon covered part of it. I just wondered how the young people felt about going back to school, whether they felt frightened, whether they were looking forward to it. I know they're going to get a very limited education even when they go back, to make sure that social distance is abided by, so that not as many children can go back at the same time. I just wondered how they felt about lockdown and the stress of lockdown. And I suppose I've got another question to Ali, which I'll put in the chat. It was raised about racism and predicted grades, which we've heard a lot about recently. And I just wondered whether the Learning Trust was doing any blind testing, looking at papers that have been marked by teachers and seeing whether they think that they've got the appropriate marks, obviously without any names on them, so that nobody knows whose papers they are. And also, I think perhaps it needs to be explained a bit more about what work is taken into account for these exams, when the cut-off date is, because I'm not clear, and it doesn't sound like everybody in this meeting is clear, and I certainly don't think the public is probably clear about when the cut-off date was. And also, I know we haven't had the guidance from the government yet about whether young people can retake their exams in the autumn or not, and how that's going to work. And if there was summer schools, would any of the young people want to go to them or feel confident in going to them, or using other facilities, say such as libraries, where they're only open to the young people to go and study?
Can I just ask if the Youth Parliament representatives can perhaps answer the questions about whether they would like to attend the summer school or any catch-up classes, and also the question about whether you feel safe about returning to school? And then perhaps, Councillor Patrick, can I ask if the other questions that you've asked, which were sort of supplementary to some of the previous questions, if we can maybe have written responses to them? Yeah. That would be great. Thank you. Does anybody want to come in terms of feeling safe and catch-up classes?
I don't mind answering that question. So
I think we're all like worried about going back to school or sixth form or whatever, because we are in the middle of a pandemic and it is worrying. But I think we're living through it, and it's something that's going to be going on for a long time. And we need to start like putting things like our mental health first. And for us to better our well-being, we need that face-to-face contact. We need that interaction that we do get in school. So I think young people now are looking forward to going back to school. In regards to summer schools, I personally don't think a lot of young people would be on board with that idea, just because a lot of young people already feel as if a big part of our lives has been taken away. Our summer has been taken away with all the social distancing measures that have been put in place. And to ask young people to go to summer school, I don't think they will be on board with the idea. I think we as young people, we want stability. We want to know what's going to happen when we get back to school and how it's going to be, because at the end of the day, summer school isn't going to operate in the same way as normal school. So if young people can just get back properly and have stability and know what's going to happen, I think that's what will really help put us all at ease. And yeah, I hope I answered all your questions.
You definitely did, and I think that you've raised a really important point actually about the fact that you feel that young people currently feel as though they've lost enough at the moment. The idea of losing their summer is perhaps too much to ask of some young people. I think it's a really, really important point. Do we have any other questions? We're very reluctantly, I'm going to have to probably wrap this part of this item up soon. But do we have any other last questions from the Commission? If not, I would just like to say that this is not going to be the last time that you will contribute, provided that you're happy to continue contributing towards our meetings. This has been really, really useful for us and has really helped to provide us with some context before we move on to the updates that we're going to receive from Children and Family Services, CAMS, and from Hackney Learning Trust. So thank you very much. Unless you have anything else to say, I'm probably going to now move on. Do you have anything else? No. Okay, so we're now moving on to the updates from HLT and from Children and Family Services. So can I again hand over to actually, before I say that, sorry, I've got people indicating on the chat that they're leaving now. I just again want to thank you so much for attending to Youth Parliament representatives. And I really hope to see you all again soon, be it whether I am able to attend one of your meetings or whether you're able to come here again. We really appreciate it. Thank you so much. Okay, so now handing over to Annie and Sarah, and after that, Sarah. Can I ask if you can keep your updates to about 2 to 3 minutes, if possible, please?
Yeah, so if I start, you've got the paper there, which was written before the May half term, so before the date of June the 1st, when primary school children were allowed to come back beyond those vulnerable children and children of critical workers. And obviously today is 15th of June, when secondary schools have been able to bring back some year 10 and some year 12 up to 25% of the capacity. So the numbers that are here, that we do have updated numbers. So we have, I'm pleased to say, the number of children of critical workers and vulnerable children has increased from below 1,000 to 1,600 as of last week, and we have an additional 1,400 children attending school in those year groups in reception year 1 and year 6, and the number of children attending childcare settings has also increased significantly to 2,500. those sound really significant numbers, but actually they're still around 10 to 15% of the number of children who would be attending if everything was open fully. And I think we've probably heard how many things schools provide when they are open. I won't go through the rest of the paper, but I will just pick up on a couple of things that were said earlier, one about the summer and one about catch-up. There's still much speculation about what will happen during the summer and what will happen in September. None of those are clear from central government at the moment. We do think that there will be some announcement about some provision during the summer, but it's not likely to be replicating school. It's more likely to be activities that will engage young people who have been missing each other and will want to come together and have some activities. It probably won't, in fact, it certainly won't compulsorily involve teachers, although they may get involved voluntarily in that. I think looking beyond at September again, it's probably still too early to say whether it seems unlikely at the moment we'll be in a position to have all children back and the schools back to normal. It also seems unlikely that we won't have any children back. So we think we're looking at most likely, although not definitely, a combination of every year group being back for some time, whether it be a week on or a week off, and still some home learning. It may be better than that. It may be more provision, but that's still uncertain. And schools are having to think about that without having anything definite to plan for. But they will, of course, do their best to make sure they do plan well for that. I think I also just wanted to say that we've been working closely with the Children and Family Service to really make sure that some of our more vulnerable children are reached out to by both schools and social workers appropriately. And I know I'll probably hand over to Sarah Wright, who I think is doing the next presentation.
Hi. I won't keep you for too long because in lots of ways the picture from Children and Families hasn't changed a lot since the last time that I spoke in this forum. We're continuing to provide most of our services online. We are gradually increasing the number of face-to-face visits that we're doing to families and taking the opportunities to now be able to meet with young people in open spaces when we can do that safely and confidentially. So our young Hackney workers are starting from this week to do direct visits as well. Our social workers have been doing those and stepping those up over the last few weeks. We continue to be delivering most of our youth work interventions remotely and through the website, but we have increased the number of detached youth work sessions that we're providing. So the detached youth work team are now going out 6 times a week. Together with Annie and others, we're now starting to look at what our summer provision might look like for young Hackney. Obviously, it's a very movable feast depending on new measures that the government might bring in. But we're trying to look at how many young people we could safely accommodate within our youth hubs at any one time, but also looking at what can be provided in open spaces as well and what other spaces might be available. In terms of numbers of referrals coming into children's social care, I think I reported last time that those were down quite considerably. They remain much lower than usual, but we have seen a gradual increase over the last couple of weeks since some of the schools started to accommodate more children. So that is gradually going up, and I guess we're anticipating that will continue to go up as more children return to school as and when. In terms of other key trends, our child protection plan figures are going up at the moment, but that's not because we've got lots more children going on, it's because we aren't managing to take children off. So I think one of the real challenges for us is being able to do that really meaningful work that can help families make change during this period. And it feels very much to us like we're in a holding period for a lot of those families, which isn't great. The same thing is happening in things like court processes, which are now taking a lot longer because we can't get the assessments done and we can't move things through and get decisions made for children. That's also true for our youth offending cohort, where we've got an accumulation of young people now waiting for their cases to be heard in court, so unable to progress on some of those things. So I don't think there's much else to say, really, other than that we're just continuing to read the situation, work with our colleagues. I think Annie's indicated some of the work we've been doing across with HLT to really, look at what's changing and how we can moderate our services as things change going forward.
Thank you both. So now over to questions. Can I just ask if members can stick to just one question, please? I think, are you okay, Sarah and Annie, to take 2 questions at a time? Perhaps not 3, but again, if members can try not to bolt on a couple of extra questions onto the first question. Can I start with Councillor Chauhan, please?
Yeah, my question is about risk assessments. The first question is, it's all related to risk assessments. There might be sub-questions, but the first is, are schools obliged to give risk assessments to the council? Do they have to file them with the council? Second is, do schools have to tell the council if there's a COVID outbreak within the school? And the third one is, can the council close down schools? Does it she have the power? And those are my questions.
Yes, okay, Annie, so if we can just answer Councillor Chauhan's questions, if that's okay.
I think my sound might have gone. You might have to give me a minute if you could just go on to the next.
Sure. Okay, Councillor Patrick.
Okay. Yeah. We know lots of children have lost education, and I was wondering what plans are being made for September. Even so, obviously there may be a change in the social distancing to 1, which will mean that we can get more children in school. But I was also wondering what plans we were looking at, whether we were looking outside the box and using different buildings, perhaps near schools or libraries, and just open them to young people so they can get some more education. I do feel that young people have lost out on 6 months education, and we already know lots of our young people are behind, and this is only going to make things worse for them. And I really do think that we need to think about every single possible way we can make sure that they are brought up to the speed that they should have been at, or if not even better, and that we need to think about doing that for September.
Thank you, Sharon. Annie, are you okay to come in now?
Yeah, I think so. And I'm sorry if I missed a point. Sorry about that. So the risk assessments, we have risk assessments from all the schools that have opened to more children, and they have been looked at by our health and safety team. They cover all the things in the guidance and things that you might expect. And I think you will have seen both on the news and if you have children, how much work has gone in, if you've got children going back to school, how much work has gone into making sure the schools are as safe as possible by the people involved in running the schools. There was a point about if there was a symptomatic case in a school, and what would happen in that case is that the child or adult needs to go home as soon as possible and have a test as soon as possible. And schools have guidance about how to get tests and how to support families to get tests. If the test proves positive, the children and adults involved in the bubble around that child also have to self-isolate for 14 days. So the guidance is very much that it's around that bubble, because I think you will be aware that in schools there's class sizes no more than 50, many are smaller than that, and they only come into contact with 1 or 2 adults, not any other adults, so that the interaction is really contained. So it would be that bubble that would be sent home. The schools and the settings are really clear about that and how that works. We've had public health input for them, and they know who to contact in terms of getting support. I think the other question was about catch up. This is a national question, and there has been some talk about whether the exam season in 2021 will be the same or will it be reduced in some way, because many children will have lost out for this period. Schools are thinking very hard about that, about what does the curriculum look like in September, and indeed for the children coming back now. Do they just focus on some key areas, or is it the broad balanced curriculum that we would want to see all the time? Again, we'll probably get some guidance on that over the coming weeks and months. There's been some government talk about additional money, additional catch-up over time, but again, it's vague at the moment. And it's hard to really commit to saying, of course, we want to do everything we can without having a budget for that, because generally additional teaching does cost money. But I think the schools are absolutely conscious of what the children are missing out on. They're providing as much as they can for children at home, and they're very much reaching out at the moment to get children back into school where they are particularly vulnerable.
Thank you very much. We have a question from Councillor Gordon.
Yeah, thanks very much, Annie. And I do obviously appreciate it's been a very difficult period for everybody, and that the Learning Trust and other council services have been working flat out. I mean, one of the very big fears that we have from the outcome of this pandemic is increasing inequality of outcomes among the children in our education system. And I just really was wondering, how complete a picture have you got in relation to the impact on children, particularly on our more vulnerable children, those with protected characteristics, those with special educational needs and disabilities, in terms of the, sorry, that's somebody in the back, it's in terms of what's been happening to them, how much education they've lost, and in terms of the resources that are going to need to give those children back, bring them back to the same opportunities as their peers. So, I mean, and the other sort of question, really following on from Councillor Patrick's opportunities in buildings, is opportunities in people. We've got, large numbers of people in our community who are willing to, who've been furloughed, including people with, a number of different skills in different industries. Is there any possibility, obviously preference would be for paid work, of bringing them in to support schools in different roles?
Thank you. And I'm wondering if we can just take them one more from Councillor Peters, and then we'll see if we've got time for Councillor Potter. Councillor Peters?
Yeah, so just a quick one. The government scheme to get laptops out to people, I think we touched on that last time, and said that HLT was working with national partners to identify those children eligible for laptops within the scheme. Can you give us an update on that?
Annie, can I hand over to you again? Sorry, you're in the spotlight today.
I think the worst case is that children have lost a term's worth of teaching. So in order to catch that up, you might think, well, they're going to need an extra term's worth of teaching, and where is that going to come from? And clearly, children do miss out on teaching from time to time, and sometimes they're off school unwell for periods of time, and they do get back into the rhythm of learning. It's always hard to catch up. I suppose what might be different is it's not like everybody else has moved on a huge amount during that period. So there is much more of a sense of everybody sort of in this together. Although I think, we're acutely aware of the different position and of the widening gap. And I'm not doubting that at the moment that gap is widening. The schools are acutely aware of it. Every teacher is acutely aware of that and would want to remedy that as much as possible. But I think to get back to where they would have been without missing a term's teaching is, a really significant ask. That would be, hours and hours of extra teaching, of tutoring. I do think that tutoring will have a big part to play in helping bridge the gap. it's been shown to be successful, and I think that the idea of using more volunteers is a really valuable one. We would want to see taken forward. It's some of that is happening at the moment online for some groups, but I think it's something that can be extended. The other question was about the laptop scheme. So the two groups of laptops, the ones for children who have a social worker, we will largely be distributing through schools because it's the simplest way to do that. And schools will be given a list of the children who the social care team think are most in need, and they will then use their knowledge of the child and the family situation to allocate those laptops. There are some of the children who have a social worker who aren't in a school, either they're too young or older or not in a school for some other reason, and the Children and Family Service will allocate those laptops. And they are due to be with us in the next 5 or 6 working days, those laptops.
Thank you very much, Annie. Very briefly, I've got a question from Councillor Potter, and then also a question from Marwa. I think we're only probably going to be able to take those two. I'm running quite significantly over now. Councillor Potter.
Thank you, Councillor Conway. Mine is very brief. Like officers, the Commission is very concerned about the drop in referrals, as I know very much your department is. And it seems it's good news in the sense that it's picking up slightly with students returning to school. Are there any other avenues that you're following currently to try and touch a base besides schools, touch a base with some of the children that might have been on your radar previously, or perhaps on the school's radar, or I just wondered whether you had any further comments on that, but I appreciate this is very difficult and worrying area.
Can I just add on to that question actually from Councillor Potter, and I wanted to ask the role that the local safeguarding partnership has played in terms of determining how or reviewing the systems that we currently have in place to ensure that our children are safe in the borough. I think that's probably best suited to Sarah.
Sure. So I can pick up on that. Anne might want to come in on the partnership element. So in terms of things that we're trying to do, it's really, really difficult to do anything that's very precise or that we feel will have a huge impact. Certainly, you know, we're still getting referrals from the police, particularly around domestic abuse. We are working closely with partners to try and pick up any concerns that, you know, some of our medical colleagues have, for instance, through hospitals, GP surgeries. We've done some information out through the public, so through Hackney Life, I think the publication was. We also met with Ed, who I know is on the call. So there's been information that's gone out through the Hackney Citizen as well. So we're trying to get that information out there. I think one of the things that we have seen is a bit of an increase in referrals that we're getting from members of the public, from neighbours, etc. So just keeping on trying to get that message out there. People probably know that the government has given the NSPCC quite a large amount of money to extend its publicity and its helpline. So again, we're getting a few more referrals through that route as well. But I'd really, you know, anybody who can help us to get the message out, please do get the message out that if people are concerned about children, you know, please contact us. In terms of the wider partnership, I know that the Children's Safeguarding Partnership is also putting information out through all their avenues and through all the multi-agency partners, and are brokering some regular meetings between the partners so that we can kind of share information and know, you know, what's happening in different services, so which services are open and how to make sure that we've got contact into those services. I don't know if Anne wanted to share anything else about the partnership.
Yeah, I just want to say, I'm just very aware of time, but just to say that Jim is very actively engaging with key partners, both in the police and health and HCVS, and about the COVID response and what we can do better as a partnership. So it's actively more than just sending out information to the kind of wider public. It's actually trying to get the key players together to make sure that we've got a joined up response. And he's been doing that throughout the whole crisis. It's probably the only thing I want to add.
Thank you very much, Anne. And we have a question from Marwa, and then we're probably going to have to draw this section of the item to a close. Marwa?
So hello, my question was, as you know, Hackney has seen like one of the second highest death rates because of coronavirus. What will be done for young people who are supposed to attend schools at the moment but are not attending? Will the school be FaceTiming them to make sure they can still continue their learning while they're at home? I mean, will there be like a differences, because people who are going to school, they will be learning more because they're having like the face-to-face conversation and learning? And what about the rest of the people? I mean, the government has given an option where you can go to school or not, but I don't think it helps young people really, because we are missing out opportunities. For example, my sister's year 6 and she's not going to school, even though she's supposed to go to school, but my parents are not allowing her because they're scared that she's going to bring something to home and we are going to get affected by it. So I want to know what will be done to make sure that all kids, all children are having the same opportunity and learning the same thing. Because it is quite important time, especially for year 10 and year 12s, because next year they will be doing their GCSEs and A-level exams and other things.
Thank you very much, Marwa. Annie, could you come in on that very briefly?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I think schools are conscious in the year groups that are returning, year 12 and year 10, year 6, year 1 reception, but not all of those children are back in school. So they are having to balance teaching the children who are in school with still setting work and staying in touch with the children who are at home. There may be some creative ways around it, like if children do have access to online learning, tuning into the lesson that's going on in school. But I think that schools are responsible for all their children, so they would want to make sure they were doing their very best. They're clearly having to balance a number of things at the moment with the care in school for children of critical workers and vulnerable children, the year groups coming back and all the children at home. So it's not the usual situation for schools, but they obviously care very much about their children and will be doing their best to balance those things.
Thank you very much, Annie. So just to say, I think going forward, I think it makes sense that certainly for the next few months anyway, that we probably should continue to have COVID on the agenda. I think that the broad updates in your reports are very, very useful for us, but I think that we benefit from attempting to at least focus part of this item on a particular area. And I think what seems to be emerging from what we heard from the young people, but also from contributions this evening, is that people are very concerned about the ever-growing gap between young people who are potentially already at a disadvantage to their peers. So I'm wondering, I don't know about the others, if that might be potentially a focus for our COVID item at the next meeting, to talk about the digital divide, because we still don't have a clear idea about the mapping of different provision across the board. So I suggest that we have that as the focus for our item. And also there were lots of questions that we didn't get to ask, some of which were submitted by Joe McLeod, who sadly was unable to attend this evening. I'm going to suggest that we we send those emails to those questions to Annie and Sarah, and if we can somehow have them incorporated potentially in the reports for the next meeting, if possible, that would be very helpful. Now moving on to the next part of this item. So following on from the 20th of May, the Commission agreed to focus this meeting on the impact of COVID-19 on children and young people's mental health and emotional well-being and the response of local mental health partnerships. A briefing has been prepared at page 26 of the agenda report pack. I'm going to invite Amy Wilkinson to highlight key points from this report for 3 minutes, and then we will go to questions and answers. Amy.
Great, thank you very much. So just to say, there's most of the key points are in the briefing there, and similarly to Children and Family Services, we are concerned about the low number of referrals that we're seeing in terms of CAMHS, and one of the Youth Parliament members already mentioned this earlier around access. So we estimate that we're seeing about half the number of referrals that we would have seen this time last year to our mental health services for children, and part of that might be around not having exam stress, but it's really difficult to tell at the moment. So our key handful of core services, so those that are commissioned as business as usual through the NHS and delivered also by the local authority, are up and running and responded really quickly in terms of a RAG rating system for children who they consider to be most risky in terms of harm. So it was a red, amber, green rating, and they have always seen those children who were red face-to-face the entire time. So after a brief sort of rejig of services in terms of virtual and digital services, all services are now taking new referrals and actually have good capacity and are really keen to encourage people to start referring and getting the word out there. Some of the other key issues are around, we've got a solid crisis service from 9 to 9, that's a phone line, and we'll be working toward making that 24/7 over the next year. The linked to lower numbers attending A&E generally for all sorts of concerns. We saw lower numbers for mental health as well, but have tried to divert them through the crisis line. Wellbeing and mental health in schools is still functioning. The services are still there, and they have been seeing families and students virtually and digitally, face-to-face where it's safe to do so, and where they've been really concerned about particularly children or families, and they have been working still with schools, particularly for those who were part of the pilots. You can see from the paper, there are 38 schools taking part in WAMS, and there were due to be a further 29 in April, which has now been moved to September. The only other thing I wanted to flag was we had already started to work toward a digital offer in terms of mental health and expedited that quite quickly. So Kooth is our digital offer that went live in April, and I've included 1 month's worth of data. We've got 2 months, and we will have a first quarter return shortly, but it's showing really promising results in terms of how many hits they're getting and how many young people they're working with, and actually a lot of the word of mouth and referrals are from schools.
Thank you very much, Amy, for that, for your report and for the updates. Actually, I'm conscious that I haven't checked in with. Sorry, did you just want to add something very, very briefly?
No, I was just going to say, I don't know if you are going to check in, but I don't know, Amy, if you want, either you or Sophie wants to say something about the bereavement service. I know it's a very sort of, sensitive topic, but I think it's just worth a sentence or two, that's all. Sorry to interrupt.
I think that would be useful. Thank you.
Yeah, so we've known that we've got a gap around bereavement services for quite a long time. So this has enabled us to divert some funding into bereavement services for children, but also families who've experienced bereavements in terms of siblings or parents or someone like that. So we've got an extended bereavement offer with St Joseph's Hospice at the moment, and that's commissioned on a short-term basis by the CCG, and are looking at a wider voluntary sector offer as well over the next few months. We can get that up and running.
Thank you very much for that. I just wanted to see whether Michael, who's on the telephone, has a question that he would like to ask. I'm conscious that I haven't checked in with you for a while. Michael, did you have a question that you'd like to ask? Okay, I'm guessing that you don't. Do we have any other questions from the Commission? No, okay, well then it will be down to me. In which case, can you please provide us with further information about the drop-off in numbers of referrals? In particular, I think it was quite interesting and useful for us to hear from the young people earlier. The young person who mentioned that their friend had been referred to services and then declined the offer of online services when the services had moved online. And I just wondered what your perspective was on that, and whether you feel that you've perhaps lost some young people because of the way in which you're having to engage with people.
I'm going to hand over to Sophie in a minute, but just to say that we saw this with all of our health services, and we saw real drops in terms of A&E, all of the children's health services, and it was partly around early messaging and people not wanting to overload the NHS and overload the services and thinking that they weren't safe or too busy. So there's been a lot of kind of counter work around that to pick them up, and people thinking that services are just not open or not there for them. So, Sophie, have you got a little bit more detail around that you wanted to share? You're on mute.
No, I think that's true. I think that, we don't have any data or evidence around it yet, but I think, the beginning of lockdown was quite a novelty, wasn't it? And I think anecdotally, what's been reported, particularly for perhaps children on the autism spectrum who struggle regularly to go to school because of the pressures of the school day and the multiple challenges, actually there was a bit of breathing space for a few weeks. So anecdotally, we can imagine that maybe some of the usual stressors reduced somewhat. Again, schools generally and GPs make referrals. If kids weren't going to school, if kids weren't going to the GP, then referrals would have dropped off. So we don't know for sure what happened and why, but as Amy said, that's contextualised within a wider trend across health services.
They are starting to go up though as well, quite steadily, which is positive.
And can I ask if you're anticipating a surge, and if you feel adequately prepared for a surge when schools return, presumably?
Yeah. Shall I go ahead, Amy?
Go on.
Yeah, definitely anticipating a surge across all the services. So there's a couple of activities underway, one with the clinical leads from the CAMHS Alliance Provider Services, where we're looking at where we anticipate the surge might be and thinking in a whole systems way, with particular emphasis on a universal approach. And I think that feeds back to WAMS a little bit as well, which is all about whole school approaches. So if we can make sure that we're providing good universal information, advice and support to children and families, then what you would hope to do is stem the flood of elevated difficulties and therefore further referrals. But of course, we do have to anticipate that there might be needs at lots of different levels. And with that in mind, we have been mapping services against possible presenting needs of young people and are coming up with a guide to services based on the Thrive model, which is all about 4 different levels of need, starting with that sort of general issues, difficulties, presenting problems, going right up to very serious risk support, and thinking about which services are best placed to respond to children with those different levels of presentations.
Great, thank you very much for that. I have 2 questions, one from Councillor Gordon and another from Councillor Peters. Councillor Gordon?
Yeah, just picking up a couple of the points that were made very eloquently by our colleagues in the Youth Parliament earlier. I mean, firstly, I don't know how much sort of mapping you've managed to do in terms of the fall off of children who had engaged with the CAMHS services before stuff moved online, and whether that they've, how many children sort of fell off, like the contribution from the Youth Parliament described happening with her friend because she didn't feel it was, the right sort of provision for her, and whether what sort of circumstances those children are in. And also, it's very more a comment to the question. It's very, obviously this is a turbulent experience for everybody's mental health, particularly children's. And the Youth Parliament contributors, described very eloquently their collective experience about, feelings of abandonment, anxiety, and also, you know, and also the online stress, and you know, the current turbulent debate and uncertainty about the future. So it's very good if there's a lot of priority given to universal provision, so that, you know, that we can respond to our collective experiences.
In terms of the question about the data, I do not have, and I don't think it's been gathered for around that very valid question about how many referrals were dropped by users, by young people and their families as a result of the move to an online service as opposed to face-to-face services. I don't know. It's a good question. I can take that question back to the Alliance.
I think just to say, so all the services are holding risk registers and are really proactively contacting families. So if someone was known to have been referred, then it's likely they would be held somewhere. I guess our worry is those who were just not almost about to get into the system and then didn't quite make it at that point. And things that have been exacerbated through the lockdown.
Thank you. Councillor Peters?
So this might not be a question that's specific for you. This might actually be for Anne or someone else. But the question about a surge made me think of waves. Are we planning for a second wave as well, or is there planning being done for that?
So shall I say something on that? Because this is a bit like crystal ball gazing. I think we are all considering the possibility of a second wave. It comes up again and again. We look to our health colleagues to give us some sort of sign about when it might be, and it seems a very inexact science. The only thing I could say is any sort of assurance that we've had the experience of the first wave, so we'll go into this in a kind of like in a different context, because we know we've already had some experience of it. But the difficulty, Councillor Peters, is getting some exact date. Will it be nearer Christmas when there's the pressure on the flu pandemic? And I read in the paper recently they were going to offer free flu vaccines for everyone. Or will it be earlier in the autumn? So it's on our minds all the time, and certainly being considered as part of risk assessments, but there's no concrete date. And I know that's not a very helpful answer, it's just a candid one.
Thank you, Anne. Is that okay, Councillor Peters? I have a question actually about the work that you've been doing with schools to help identify the mental health needs of children. I think particularly in light of what we've just heard from the Youth Parliament representatives about the lack of consistency that many of them are experiencing in terms of contact with the schools. I just wondered whether you know, you have any experience of that also, whether there are some schools that you feel have a real grip on what their young people are experiencing, and there are others that are perhaps lacking somewhat in that area.
Is that a question for me? Yeah,
probably, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so I can't speak for the experience of children in the whole range of schools across the piece. Obviously, because that would be impossible at this stage. I think the way that the WAMS service is working is that we've switched to necessarily an online version of what would normally happen. So normally the allocated CAMHS worker to a school would go in once a week, once every 2 weeks, or once a month, depending on the size of the school, and would work to an action plan that had previously been agreed by the mental health lead for the school, by the CAMHS worker, and by the wellbeing framework partner from Hackney Learning Trust. Now, in the light of COVID, that's all been put on hold unless there are aspects of the action plan which are relevant and important at this time. So, for example, if one of the roles for the CAMHS worker in school, in that particular school, is to work in a multi-agency, multidisciplinary setting to identify children's needs. So, for example, we have a child who we're very concerned about. Let's discuss this young person and work out, make a formulation and decide what the best thing to do is. So that work is still going on. So if, for example, a teacher rings a child's home and comes away from that call feeling concerned about the well-being of the child or of the family in general, then that teacher has access to their CAMHS worker to have a consultation about that young person, and then decisions can be made about how best to take it forward. So that's one example of how CAMHS workers in schools are being used at this time. Other things that I know that they've been doing, particularly with primary schools, is holding parents meetings online, so parents coffee mornings, where the CAMHS worker is available to chat to parents and talk through any difficulties that they might be having in the lockdown context. And there's a whole range of other things that CAMHS workers have been doing within that service.
But has there been any work in particular to try and encourage schools to have any more contact with their young people, or to perhaps change their approach that they're having? Because I suppose I'm just thinking in relation quite specifically to the fact that the referrals have gone down so dramatically. Is there anything over and above what you would normally do, sort of, you know, in the normal context, that you're attempting to do now to try and ensure that we're weeding out who those young people are through the means that we currently have? I
think that's a difficult question for me to answer, because I think it goes back to the discussions earlier on with Annie, and based on the comments from the young people, that they felt abandoned, or that the schools hadn't been contacting families. Oh, sorry, I'm getting lots of feedback suddenly. Is everybody on mute?
No, I think that was Sophie. Yeah, great.
So, okay.
Oh. Sorry, I've muted you by accident. Sorry. Sophie, you're on mute. Sorry, it was me who...
Hello, can you hear
Sorry.
me? I think somebody else is not on mute. I'm getting. Oh, there we go. That's better. I think that the question is for schools' policies and protocols about how often they're contacting children. It's definitely not going to be the role of the CAMHS worker in school to tell schools how they should be doing that. And I think what CAMHS workers have been doing have been providing schools with as many resources as they need and as they ask for, in terms of working with children, you know, talking to families, talking to children on the phone, and making the best use of that contact that they do have.
Okay. Thank you very much. That was very useful, although I think it does raise some questions for me about how we are going to bridge that gap going forward, in terms of if there is a disparity in terms of the ways that different schools are communicating with their young people. You know, how can we ensure that we are identifying the young people who are most at need? I think I may have, do we have any other questions from anybody? I actually just have one last question. That's about the online platform Kooth. And I just wondered, are there other boroughs that are using this? And are we able to, because I imagine, because we've only been using it very recently, that it must be quite difficult for us to ascertain whether what's happening is, you know, whether we're getting a good number of young people engaging with the platform or not, and whether perhaps we have any sense of how it's working in other boroughs to know.
So I don't know about data from other boroughs, but what I can say is that when it was decided what the initial capacity should be, that was set, and we are already up to 2/3 of the originally commissioned capacity. So what that means is that the offer has been, I think what happened was that we agreed with Kooth what that capacity should look like based on the size of the borough population, etc., and based on Kooth's knowledge of other boroughs' usage. And we're already up to 2/3. So I think that we're probably getting very good usage, and we will be looking to extend that capacity to ensure that more young people can get that support.
And how inclusive is that service, but also the other services that we have moved online, in terms of our children with additional needs who may not be able to access online services in quite the same way?
When by additional needs, you mean special educational needs and disabilities?
Special educational needs, but yeah, and disabilities, yeah.
That's a good question, which I can't answer off the top of my head. So I'll have to get back to you about that.
Okay. Thank you very much. I think we had Marwa. I'm not sure if is your question, because we're currently talking about mental health. Marwa, do you have a question in relation to the mental health support to children and young people in the borough? If it was more of a general question, then I may ask that we put that to Annie in an email, if that's okay. Okay, great, thank you. I think in which case, if we don't have any more questions for Sophie or Amy, then I think we're probably going to have to move on because we're running over time now. Thank you so much for your contributions. It's been really, really helpful, particularly in light of the contributions from the Hackney Youth Parliament representatives. And I'm sure that we're probably going to have to speak to you again soon, because it's definitely something that keeps coming up time and time again. Young people and the people working with them are quite concerned about the impact that all of this is having on their mental health. Thank you again for your contributions. Thank you. Okay, moving on to item 6, which is the work programme. Could members please turn to page 37 of the agenda pack? An outline of the work programme for the Commission is provided, which includes standing items for inclusion at page 45, and one-off agreed items from 2019-20 at pages 46 to 47. With a need to focus on response and recovery for COVID-19, there will be reduced capacity to scrutinise other topics at Commission meetings going forward. In this context, it will be even more important for the Commission to prioritise those issues it wishes to scrutinise. The Commission will meet with Cabinet members and consult senior officers as to how the Commission can contribute to the ongoing scrutiny of COVID-19 and the development of the broader work programme going forward. The Commission will also seek the input of stakeholders in this process. And just to point out that we've had discussions with stakeholders, Martin and I have had discussions with stakeholders over the past couple of days about how we can better incorporate the views and contributions of not just Youth Parliament representatives, but the parent voice and the voice of young people more broadly, and also you know, charities working with children and young people and their families, how we can better incorporate their views, input in items that we have going forward. And that may well be that we have roundtable meetings to discuss their experiences, because I think we'll probably all agree that from today it's incredibly useful to have a sense of what the service users' experiences are of our services, together with the reports that we're getting from officers about the services that are being delivered. Okay, so now moving on to item 7, the minutes from the previous meeting. Draft of the minutes of the meeting held on the 20th of May are attached for members to note and agree. Do you agree? Do we agree?
Agreed.
Great. Okay, moving on to item 8, any other business? We don't have any other items, I don't think. No. Okay, in which case the date of the next meeting is the 13th of July. I'm now going to officially close this meeting. Thank you all for attending.